The hotel room was dark except for the city. Dubai at 2 in the morning looked like something designed to make you feel small. Floor-to-ceiling glass, 41 stories up, and out there the lights stretched so far in every direction that you could convince yourself the world had no edges. I'd been awake for 19 hours. My shoes were still on. The minibar was untouched because I'd told myself I'd eat something real after the debrief. And the debrief had run until midnight, and now it was past 2, and what I'd eaten was a packet of peanuts from the flight. I'm Jennifer Miller, 34 years old. I investigate corporate fraud for a living, which means I spend a lot of time in hotel rooms in cities that aren't mine, looking at numbers that don't add up, waiting for someone to explain why. The air conditioning hummed. That specific pitch that all hotel rooms share regardless of country. That low mechanical breath that fills the silence when everything else has gone quiet. I picked up my phone, not for any reason. Habit. I opened the camera app. I did this maybe 3 or 4 nights a week when I was traveling. My Charlotte condo had 4 cameras, front door, living room, kitchen, guest room, installed after a break-in, 2 floors down the previous spring, 2 floors down the previous spring. My neighbor Dale had lost a laptop and a watch that had belonged to his father. After that, I spent $200 and an afternoon and never looked back. The app just lived on my phone, one tap away, something I checked the way some people check the weather. The living room camera showed light. I stopped. Not the ambient glow of a street light through the blinds. Actual light. A lamp on. The one near the couch. I zoomed in. She was barefoot. Brooke, my sister, 28 years old and 6 years younger than me, and sprawled across my couch like she had been living there for a week. Her feet were up on the armrest. The armrest I paid extra for because the fabric was this specific shade of gray I'd spent 40 minutes choosing. She was laughing at something. Her head was tipped back, comfortable in the way you're only comfortable somewhere you feel entirely entitled to be. There was a man. I had never seen him before in my life. He was in my kitchen. The refrigerator door was open. He was standing in front of it with the unhurried ease of someone deciding between leftovers, one hand on the door, leaning in. My refrigerator, my groceries, or what was left of them after 10 days in Dubai. I watched. I did not move. I did not call. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, shoes still on, phone in both hands, watching a man I had never seen help himself to whatever was in my kitchen while my sister laughed at something on my couch. I switched to the living room camera with audio. It took a moment to connect. That half second of buffering. Then the sound came through, and the first thing I heard was Brooke laughing again, and then a man's voice low and easy, and Brooke saying something I couldn't catch, and then clearly without any effort at all. The way someone says a thing they have said many times before and fully believe. Dad's lawyer is putting the condo in my name. She can't do anything about it. By the time she gets back from Dubai, it's done. The man said something, a laugh. Your dad's smarter than I thought. Brooke, he's been planning this since she bought it. I sat with the phone in my hands, and I listened to my sister explain how my father had been building a legal framework for months to take the only piece of property I owned, the only thing in my life that had nothing to do with my family or my father's money or anything other than 4 years of my own work, and I did not call anyone. I did not text. I did not say a single word out loud. What I did was press record. The app had a screen record function. I used it every time I needed to document something a client didn't want documented. 47 seconds of footage. Then I clipped it, labeled it with the date and the timestamp, and sent it to Carol Embry. Carol had been my attorney for 3 years, which is to say, she had reviewed my condo purchase, updated my will, and handled exactly nothing dramatic until tonight. She was 52, measured, the kind of woman who did not use exclamation points in professional correspondence. I had her number in my phone under Embry because that was what she went by. My phone rang 53 seconds after I sent the clip. Jennifer. Her voice was different than I'd ever heard it, precise in a new way. This is attempted property fraud in progress. You need to call the police. Now. Not yet. Jennifer. There's something else on the recording. She was quiet. After Brooke and the man had finished talking about the condo, after the laughter had settled, there was a quieter moment. They weren't performing anymore. They were just 2 people in a room, and Brooke said something to him in a lower register, almost offhand, The way you say something you've been carrying for a while. We did it once. We can do it again. And then, so quiet I had turned up the volume all the way and pressed the phone against my ear. She'll never find out what really happened to Mom. The air conditioning hummed. 41 stories below, Dubai kept going. Lights in every direction. The world with no edges. I need to hear the rest of what they say in my apartment, I told Carol. She was quiet for 3 full seconds, which was long for her. Then we document everything they say from here forward. I'm filing a preliminary alert on the property title first thing in the morning to pause any transfer. Do not contact your father. Do not contact your sister. Do not change your return flight. I wasn't going to. I hung up. My mother's name was Grace. She died 4 years ago. A single car accident on a rural road outside Raleigh, a Wednesday night in November. Car went off the road into a ravine and caught fire. No witnesses. My father handled the funeral arrangements, the estate, all of it. Closed casket. He said the fire damage was too severe. I was 30 years old and I had just moved to Charlotte, and I was deep enough in grief that I accepted every explanation I was given without asking a single question. I had not thought about that night in a year, maybe more. I opened my laptop. I created a new folder. I gave it a name. It was the same thing I did at the beginning of every investigation. A clean container, a starting point, a place to put things in the order they arrived until the order started to mean something. I typed the name into the folder label. Grace. Then I pulled up the camera feed and I watched my sister sleep on my couch, feet still up on the armrest, the man I'd never seen in my guest room by then, the light off. And I began to write down everything I knew in the order I knew it, the same way I would for any case, starting with the first observable fact and working forward. The air conditioning hummed. Outside, the city held all its lights. I was not going to call anyone. I was not going to react. I was going to build something solid enough that when I came home in 8 days, there would be no room left for anyone to lie to me. That was what I knew how to do. And for the first time since I'd opened that camera app, something in my chest settled into something cold and very still and very focused. I had been doing this kind of work for 11 years. Locating fraud inside systems designed to hide it. Finding the thread that, once pulled, unraveled everything. I had never once worked a case where the person at the center of it was someone I used to call Dad. I typed the first line. Subject has prior access to victim asset via spare key, provided approximately 3 years ago, believed forgotten by victim. I paused. Outside, the city kept going. 41 floors below me, somewhere behind all those lights, the world was still turning the way it always had. I hit enter and started the second line. I kept the camera feed open until 4 in the morning, not watching for anything specific, just watching. Brooke slept with one arm over her face, the way she had since she was a child. I remembered that from when she was small, before the distance between us became something permanent. She had always slept like she was trying to block something out. The man I didn't know slept in my guest room with the door half open. At some point, around 3, he got up to use the bathroom, and I watched the hallway camera catch him padding back in the dark, barefoot on my floors, entirely at ease. I closed the laptop just before 4, not because I was done, because there was nothing more to see tonight, and my eyes had started doing that thing they do after hour 17 of a working day, where everything goes slightly soft at the edges. I set 3 alarms, pulled off my shoes without untying them, and lay down on top of the covers. I did not sleep for a long time. When I finally did, I dreamed about my mother's kitchen, the smell of it. She kept a dish towel hanging from the oven handle, always the same faded yellow one, and the whole room smelled like coffee and dish soap and whatever she had been cooking since noon. I woke up at 6:43 to the alarm and lay still for a moment before I remembered where I was. Dubai, 41 floors up, 8 days still on the contract. I sat up and opened the laptop. Grace Miller was the kind of woman who held things quietly. That was how I had always described her to people who hadn't known her, because it was the most accurate thing I could say. She was not loud. She was not dramatic. She laughed easily at small things, and she kept every piece of paper she had ever received in labeled folders in a filing cabinet she had owned since before I was born. She grew up in Wake County, North Carolina, on 40 acres of land her grandparents had farmed and her parents had held onto through decades when selling would have been easier. She knew the name of every plant on that property. She could tell you the soil type in any corner of those fields without looking it up. She was 28 years old when she married my father. That detail always caught people when I said it. Roy Miller was 32, recently relocated from Atlanta for a regional manager position with a mid-sized insurance company, charming in the way that corporate men who are good at their jobs are often charming. He smiled at the right moments and knew how to make a room feel like he was the most reasonable person in it. My mother was a single woman with land and a modest inheritance from her parents and a quiet life she had built exactly the way she wanted it. I was 4 years old. I don't remember the wedding. I only know the version of my mother that came after it. Within 5 years, the 40 acres were restructured under a joint trust Roy controlled. The savings account my mother had kept in her own name since her 20s had been folded into a joint account Roy managed. The life insurance policy she'd carried since her 30s had been updated. I was a teenager by then, old enough to notice things I didn't have vocabulary for yet. The way my mother would reach for her checkbook and then stop herself and wait until Roy was in the room. The way she explained his decisions to me as though they were collaborative when I could tell by her face they were not. I sat in the Dubai hotel room and typed all of this into the case file. And while I was typing, I pulled up the camera feed. My guest room. Still dark. Brooke's arms still over her face on my couch. I kept typing. When my mother died 4 years ago, I was 30 and 2 months into a new job at the forensic accounting firm and living in an apartment I'd been in for 11 months. Roy called at 2 in the morning. There had been an accident. Grace had been driving alone on a rural road south of Raleigh, a road she had driven 100 times, and the car had gone off the road into a ravine. Fire. No witnesses. He handled everything from the moment he called me to the moment I got back in my car after the burial. And I let him because I was deep enough in grief that the path of least resistance was to let someone else hold the machinery of it. Closed casket. He said the fire damage was too severe. He said it gently and once, and I did not ask again. I was standing in the kitchen of my Charlotte apartment in a t-shirt and the pajama pants I had worn to bed 3 hours earlier. The overhead light was on, because when the phone had rung I had not thought to turn on a lamp, just walked toward the sound and answered. And the kitchen light was the only one already on from when I had gotten a glass of water before bed. I remember that specifically. The glass of water still on the counter, half full. The way the overhead light made everything look flat and overexposed. Roy said the words, and then there was a quality to the silence that followed that I had never heard before and have not heard since. A silence that was not empty, but full of something pressing in from every direction. And I stood there in the flat light looking at the half-full glass, and I did not say anything for what felt like a very long time. When I finally spoke, I asked which hospital. He told me there was no hospital. There was nothing to go to. He had already called the funeral home. He had already handled it. He said it the way he said everything, with a patience that offered no opening. Brooke was 24. She stood next to Roy at the graveside and did not cry. Not once, and at the time I told myself grief took different shapes in different people. I drove back to Charlotte the day after. 2 months later, I started a new case. A manufacturing company in Greensboro with a CFO cooking the books, and I went back to work the way you do when work is the thing that makes sense. I minimized the case file and opened a different window. Roy had called on a Sunday 3 weeks before my Dubai trip to say Brooke was between apartments and did I mind if she stayed at my place for a few days while she sorted something out. I had said it was fine. That was the conversation in full. I had not given it more than 2 minutes of thought. I stared at the camera feed. She had not arrived with a bag for a few days. She had arrived with a man I had never heard her mention and what looked, from the guest room footage, like a very full suitcase. The lamp she'd left on was mine. The blanket she pulled over herself was from a cabinet I kept specifically for guests. She had found it on the first try, which meant she knew where I kept things. How many times had she been in my apartment when I was traveling? I traveled 11 months out of 12. The thought arrived quietly and sat down. I added a line to the case file, then another. The camera feed showed Brooke waking up just before 8. She stretched, checked her phone, and within 4 minutes the man was in the kitchen running the coffee maker. My coffee maker, my coffee. He moved through the space the way people move through places they have decided belong to them. I watched my sister accept a mug from him and curl up in the corner of my couch and laugh at something he said, and I felt the distance between Dubai and Charlotte as a specific physical fact. I pulled up everything I had on record about my father's financial activities since my mother died. $400,000 in life insurance, paid out within 58 days of her death, which was fast, but not impossible. The 40 acres in Wake County had been sold 8 months later to a residential developer Roy knew through his insurance network, undervalued by roughly 30% of the land's assessed worth. By the time Brooke turned 25, Roy was paying her rent directly, not giving her money. Paying the landlord, which meant he controlled the condition of her housing in the same way he had once controlled the condition of my mother's finances. The condo I lived in now, I had bought with 4 years of savings and a mortgage I had qualified for entirely on my own income. No family money, no trust, no contribution from Roy. I had done this deliberately, and I had not told Roy the details of how I paid for it, only that I had. He had been planning to take it since I bought it. That was what Brooke had said. He's been planning this since she bought it. I thought about that for a long moment. Then I closed that line of thinking and opened a new one, because the thing Brooke had said about my mother was still sitting at the back of everything, and I had not yet decided what to do with it. We did it once. We can do it again. She'll never find out what really happened to Mom. I replayed those 7 seconds 4 times. The audio quality was clear enough. Brooke's voice, low, almost affectionate in tone, the way people speak when they are certain they are not being heard. I added a new section to the case file. I labeled it separate from the property documentation. I labeled it only with the date my mother had died. Then I closed the laptop and got ready for my 9 o'clock meeting, because I was still being paid by a client in this city and I was going to do my job. And when I came home in 8 days, I was going to be ready. The meeting ran until noon. Then there was lunch with the client's legal team, which I sat through eating almost nothing, and then a 2-hour review session with their internal auditor that required my full attention. And I gave it my full attention because that was what I was there to do, and because the alternative was to spend the afternoon at a conference table in downtown Dubai, thinking about the sound of my sister's voice, saying things about my mother that I could not unhear. I got back to the hotel at 6:15. The sun was still up. I ordered food from the room service menu without reading it and sat on the edge of the bed and opened the camera feed. New footage from the afternoon. The man had been on the phone in my kitchen. I had not yet learned his name, but I would by the end of the week. He was pacing in front of the window the way people pace when they are comfortable enough in a space to move through it without thinking. I turned up the audio. His voice was easy, the voice of someone who was good at being easy. The father's got the lawyer lined up. We do the transfer, file the paperwork, and by the time she contests it, we've already liquidated. A pause. Yeah, same play as Wilmington. I set the phone down on the bed beside me. Wilmington. He had done this before. I picked the phone back up and watched the rest of the footage without moving. He hung up and poured himself a glass of water from my tap and stood at the counter scrolling his phone, and the ordinary ease of it was the thing that stayed with me after I closed the app, not the fraud. The ease. The complete absence of any concern that he might have been seen or heard or documented. He had no idea I was watching. I added his voice memo to the case file, time-stamped and labeled. Then I opened a browser and started to look. I called Carol Embry the next morning at 7, Charlotte time, which was 3 in the afternoon in Dubai. She picked up on the second ring. Tell me you haven't contacted anyone. I haven't contacted anyone, I said. I need you to pull public records on my father's estate activity going back 4 years. Everything from the month my mother died forward. Insurance disbursements, property transfers, any legal filings in Wake County. Carol was quiet for a moment in the careful way she got quiet when she was already thinking ahead of the conversation. I can do that. Give me until tomorrow morning. She called back in 18 hours. I was sitting at the hotel desk with the curtains open when my phone rang, the Charlotte skyline replaced in my mind by 41 floors of Dubai morning. Your father increased your mother's life insurance policy 6 months before she died, Carol said. Doubled the coverage. The payout processed in 58 days. I had a pen in my hand. I did not write anything down. I just held it. That alone is not evidence of anything, Carol said carefully. But combined with the speed of the disbursement and the way the estate was restructured in the 6 months following her death, it is a pattern I have seen before. What kind of pattern? She took a breath. Financial planning around a death that has not happened yet. The pen was still in my hand. Outside, Dubai was fully lit and fully awake and moving at its specific relentless pace. I asked her to keep pulling records. I did not tell her yet about the auto repair connection I had found the previous night in my own research databases, the ones I used for corporate investigations, the ones that mapped business networks and subsidiary chains and financial relationships between entities that preferred not to be associated with each other publicly. The man in my kitchen had a name, Kyle Voss. 2 civil judgments in 2 separate states for financial fraud, both settled, neither resulting in criminal charges. A restraining order filed by a woman in Wilmington, North Carolina, whose family had lost a piece of property in a dispute involving and this was the exact language from the filing, real estate consultant acting as an intermediary, and a business connection to a holding company that had owned, at various points over the past 12 years, several auto repair shops across North Carolina. I had found the connection at 11:15 the previous night, and I had sat with it for a long time before I added it to the case file. Grace had kept every maintenance record for every car she had ever owned, filed by date, by service type, by mileage. I knew this because I had inherited 1 box of her papers after the funeral, a box Roy had apparently not noticed or had not thought worth taking, and I had put it in the closet of my Charlotte guest room without opening it because opening it had felt like something I would do when I was ready. I had not been ready. I was not entirely ready now, but I was almost certain, in the way you become certain about things you have not yet confirmed, that somewhere in that box was a receipt from a service appointment that had taken place very close to the date my mother had driven alone down a rural road at night and not come home. The shop name was in that box, under Brooks Clothes, in my guest room. I could not get to it from Dubai. Roy called that afternoon. I was walking back from a meeting with the client's outside counsel when my phone buzzed and his name appeared on the screen. I stopped on the sidewalk in the Dubai heat and watched his name pulse on the screen for 4 full rings, and then I answered. "How's the trip, sweetheart? Everything going well?" His voice was what it had always been. Warm, patient, the voice of a man who had never in his life needed to raise it to get what he wanted. "It's fine," I said. "Long days. That's important work you're doing. I always tell people, my daughter, she goes all over the world doing this." A brief pause, calibrated. I wanted to mention Brooks between apartments again. You know how she is. I told her she could stay at your place for a few days while she gets things sorted. I hope that's all right. I should have asked earlier. "That's fine," I said. "She knows where everything is." "You're a good sister." Another pause. "Just long enough. You sound tired." "Long days," I said again. We said goodbye. He told me to get some rest. I stood on a sidewalk in Dubai in 96-degree heat with my phone in my hand and my pulse completely steady, which had surprised me until I understood it was not steadiness. It was something else. Something that had settled in and was not going anywhere. He was testing me, checking whether I knew, giving himself a version of the conversation he could point to later, if he needed to, as evidence of normal family communication. My hands were shaking by the time I got back to the hotel. Not from fear, from the particular effort of performing calm for someone you have just reclassified entirely, and from understanding, somewhere below thought, that I had been performing calm for him for years without knowing that was what I was doing. Carol called the next morning before I had finished my coffee. I knew from the way she opened it. She did not say good morning. She said my name, once, the way she used it when she needed me to hold still for something. "Roy's attorney filed preliminary paperwork yesterday afternoon. He's claiming the down payment on your condo came from the family trust. His documentation shows a transfer from the trust account into your personal account, approximately 6 weeks before your closing date." That didn't happen. I know it didn't happen. The documentation is forged. Competently forged, which means someone paid for a competent forgery, which means this has been in planning for a significant amount of time. A pause that had weight behind it. He didn't decide to do this last week, Jennifer. He's been building this paper trail since before you booked the Dubai trip. Possibly longer. I stood at the hotel window with my coffee going cold in my hand. Below me, Dubai had been fully awake for hours, the city operating at its relentless pace regardless of what was happening in a hotel room 41 floors up. He knew I was going, I said. He may have arranged for you to go. I'd want to look at how that assignment came to you. The assignment had come through a referral from a senior partner at my firm, a man who had worked with this particular Middle Eastern client for several years. Nothing unusual about the channel on its face. Standard professional network. But Roy had attended enough of my firm's client dinners over the years, smiled at enough of the right people in the right rooms, that I could not say with certainty the referral had nothing to do with him. The thought arrived, and I set it in the case file in my mind, in the section labeled Things I Cannot Yet Prove but Will Not Discard. What does this do to the transfer timeline? I asked. If I don't intervene, they could complete the title transfer within the week. I've already filed a preliminary title alert this morning, which buys time. But contesting forged bank records takes months, Jennifer. He knows that. He built the delay in deliberately. By the time you could prove the records were fabricated in a civil proceeding, they would have already moved on whatever they planned to do with the property. Kyle's voice from the kitchen recording came back to me. The easy confidence of it. By the time she contests it, we've already liquidated. I need more time in the apartment, I said. Enough for them to keep talking on camera. How much more time are we talking about? I'll know when I hear it. Carol understood without requiring me to explain further. She told me she would hold the civil action until I returned, but that if Roy's attorney moved to finalize the title before then, she would have to act unilaterally. I told her I understood and we hung up. I pulled up the camera feed. The footage from the previous night was already queued. I had set the system to flag any motion in the bedroom cameras, and something had triggered it at 11:47. Brooke was in my bedroom closet, not the guest room where she had been sleeping. My bedroom. My actual closet, the one with the specific shade of gray fabric on the armrest outside it. The one I had spent an afternoon organizing the previous January. She had the door open, and she was moving through it with the proprietary ease of someone who had already decided the space belonged to her. She pulled a blouse off a hanger, held it up against herself, said something over her shoulder to Kyle, who was standing in the doorway with his coffee. They both laughed at something. I could not hear what. She put the blouse back and reached past it, and her hand found the shelf above the hanging rod. The photograph had been there for 4 years. A frame, 5 inches by 7, a photograph taken at a family reunion when I was around 10 years old. My mother and I were standing in the backyard of the Wake County property in afternoon light. Grace's hand on my shoulder, both of us squinting slightly into the sun. She was smiling in that particular way she had in photographs, slightly surprised by it, as though happiness had arrived a half-second before she was ready. It was the only photograph I owned of just the two of us. I had moved it from apartment to apartment through my 20s without thinking about it. The way you carry certain things, not because you regularly look at them, but because leaving them behind is not a thing you are capable of doing. Brooke lifted it off the shelf and held it out and looked at it. She always acted like she was Mom's favorite. Her voice was easy, almost amused, the tone of someone making an observation so familiar it required no particular feeling attached to it. Look where that got her. Kyle said, "Throw it out." Brooke held the frame for a moment. Something crossed her face, a flicker of something I could not fully read from the camera angle, there and then gone before I could name it. Then she lowered the frame into the trash bag she had apparently brought in specifically for this purpose and let it go. The glass cracked when it hit the bottom of the bag, a small, clean sound. The audio picked it up clearly. I sat at the hotel desk with my phone in both hands, and I did not move for a long time. The coffee was cold. Outside, the city maintained its pace. I looked at the frozen camera frame, Brooke already reaching past the gap where the photograph had been already moving to the next hanger. And I felt something settle in my chest that was not grief exactly, but was adjacent to it. Not new. It had been there for years, probably. I had simply not looked directly at it. The photograph had gone into the bag the way you drop packaging from something already used. No hesitation, no acknowledgement that it had ever mattered to anyone. She moved through the wreckage of my things with the same comfortable ease that Kyle moved through my kitchen, and the similarity between them, the shared quality of it, told me something about how long they had been practicing this together. I added the footage to the case file, time-stamped and labeled, and I noted in the file that the photograph had been destroyed in a trash bag at 11:52 in the evening. I noted the sound of the glass. I wrote it down in the same flat professional language I used for everything else, because that was the only way I knew how to hold it. That night, I could not sleep. I lay on top of the hotel covers in the dark with the air conditioning running its low hum, and I let myself look at the full shape of what I had assembled without flinching away from where it pointed. The forged bank records. 12 days of camera footage. Kyle on the phone in my kitchen, referencing Wilmington. His documented connection to an auto repair network across North Carolina, a connection I had traced through my professional databases to a holding company that had dissolved 3 years after my mother died, the insurance policy Roy had doubled 6 months before her death, the closed casket, and the explanation I had accepted without a single question because I was 30 years old and my mother was gone, and the ground under my life had simply dropped away. And at the back of all of it, 7 words in my sister's voice, barely audible on the first night's recording, said in the quiet after she thought the important conversation was over, "She'll never find out what really happened to Mom." At 3 in the morning, I got up and filled the electric kettle and sat in the chair by the window, and I made myself follow the pattern all the way back to the beginning. Roy had married a woman with land and a modest inheritance, and had spent 5 years restructuring everything she owned into accounts and trusts he controlled. He had doubled her life insurance 6 months before she died, 2 days before she drove alone down a rural road at night and did not come home. Her car had been serviced at a garage I had not yet confirmed by name, but whose connection to Kyle's network I had already partially traced through corporate records. He had collected the payout within 58 days, sold the land below market value to a developer in his professional circle. Had Brooke financially dependent on him within the year in a structure that ensured her loyalty without requiring him to explain himself. And now, 4 years later, the man who had introduced Brooke to Kyle and arranged for forged paperwork to be filed while I was 6,000 miles away was 2 weeks from taking the only asset I had ever owned free and clear. I sat in the chair and I let all of it sit in front of me without trying to make it smaller than it was. Then I picked up my phone and opened the audio from the first night and played the 7 seconds again. "We did it once. We can do it again." I had been hearing those words as a reference to property fraud, the Wilmington operation, something financial and repeatable and bounded within the logic of what I could already document. But sitting in that chair at 4 in the morning with the full pattern visible in a way it had not been when I was still trying to find the edges of it, I heard the phrase land differently. "We did it once" did not mean we ran the same property scheme in another city. It meant we made someone disappear and then collected everything she left behind. And "we can do it again" meant I was the next name, not to die. The version of disappearing they had designed for me was financial. Remove the condo, eliminate my independent footing, draw me back into the estate where Roy held authority over every account. But my mother, 4 years ago on a rural road with her car recently serviced by a garage tied to a man she had never met, had been the first time. I set the phone down on the windowsill. I did not let myself move past what I could prove. That discipline was the foundation of every case I had ever built, and I was not going to abandon it now simply because this one was personal. You documented what could be verified. You built the structure from observable facts in the order they could be confirmed. You did not file a case on what you believed in the dark at 4 in the morning. You filed it on what you could put in front of someone who owed you nothing and still could not dismiss it. What I could prove was the pattern. What I still needed was the receipt in the box in my guest room. I called Carol at 7, Charlotte time. She answered before the second ring. "I want to build 3 cases," I said, running simultaneously. Her pause was the thinking kind, not the hesitating kind. I had learned the difference. "Tell me." "Civil action for the condo fraud, the forged records, and illegal occupancy. Criminal referral to the State Bureau of Investigation for the insurance fraud and the estate restructuring after my mother died. and a formal request to the Wake County District Attorney to reopen the investigation into how she died. The silence that followed was longer than her usual thinking pause. "The third case," she said finally. "You understand what you're asking for there. That's not fraud. That's a significantly different category of allegation and significantly harder to establish. My father went after my mother." A shorter silence. "I need the receipt from your guest room and the full business network documentation on Voss, whatever your databases have given you." "You'll have both when I get back. I told Roy my flight was delayed. He thinks I have another week." "Then I'll file the sealed complaint today to preserve the timeline. Don't contact anyone in your family. Don't change your flight. Let those cameras run." "I know. Jennifer!" Her voice settled into something that was not quite professional. "Be careful with the third case. Not legally careful. I mean the other kind." I told her I understood, and I meant it. After we hung up, I opened the laptop and looked at the guest room camera. The box sat in the lower left corner of the closet. Brooke's jackets piled over it, still sealed. She had not moved it. She did not care what was inside it, what her mother had kept and labeled and preserved in the specific, meticulous way Grace had kept everything she believed was worth holding on to. The receipt was in there, her handwriting on the tab. Car. The thermal paper with the shop name and the service date and the $43 total paid in cash 2 days before my mother drove alone down a rural road at night. I just had to get home before Brooke decided to throw the box out the way she had thrown out the photograph. I added one line to the case file. Primary evidence target. Document box. Guest room. Lower left corner. Retrieve before any other action upon return. Then I closed the laptop and got dressed and walked out into the Dubai morning to do my job because I was still being paid by a client in this city and I was going to do my job. And in 6 days, I was going to land in Charlotte and walk 4 blocks to a hotel and open a camera feed and wait for Roy Miller to step into my apartment for the last time. I landed at Charlotte Douglas at 6:40 in the morning on a Thursday, and I did not go home. I took a rideshare to a hotel 4 blocks from my building, a mid-range place I had stayed in twice before when my unit was being painted, and once when a pipe burst in the unit above mine. The front desk clerk gave me a room on the 7th floor without asking why I was checking in at 7 in the morning with a carry-on and no reservation. I tipped him well and went upstairs and opened my laptop before I had taken off my coat. The camera feed loaded. Brooke was asleep. Kyle's side of the bed was empty, sheets thrown back. By 8:15 he came back into frame with coffee, sat on the edge of the bed, said something that made her roll over and pull the pillow over her face. Comfortable. Settled. They had been living in my apartment for 12 days. I had told Roy my return flight was delayed by a week. A client complication, I'd said. He had expressed appropriate sympathy and said to take the time I needed. I had 7 days. On the 4th day of my return, just past 10 in the morning, the camera showed Brooke and Kyle leaving together. She had a bag. He had his jacket. They moved toward the door with the unhurried pace of people with somewhere to be, but no urgency about getting there. I watched them go. I waited 20 minutes after the door closed. Then I picked up the spare key I kept with my neighbor Dale, and I walked the 4 blocks to my own building. The lobby smelled the same as it always had. The elevator had the same slow hydraulic pause on the 3rd floor that it had always had. I stood in the hallway outside my own door for a moment, key in hand, listening to the specific silence of a floor where everyone was at work. I unlocked the door and went in. The smell hit me first. Her shampoo, something floral I didn't recognize, and underneath it a cologne that was not unpleasant on its own but did not belong in my home. Someone had left a glass on my coffee table without a coaster. There were shoes by the door that were not mine. I did not stop to take inventory. I went directly to the guest room. Brooke's clothes were everywhere. She had unpacked fully, which I had not been able to confirm from the camera angle, and the room had the specific disorder of someone who had decided to inhabit a space rather than visit it. The closet door was open. In the lower left corner, under a pile of her jackets, was the box, still sealed. I lifted the jackets off carefully and set them on the bed. I carried the box to the doorway where the light was better and set it down and opened it. My mother's handwriting on the tabs, black ink, her specific cursive that leaned slightly to the left, neat in the way her whole system had been neat. property documents in one section, personal correspondence in another, financial records, household records, and at the back, a section she had labeled simply car, the word written in the same unhurried hand as everything else. I went to car first. Oil changes, tire rotations, a recall notice from 9 years ago that she had kept even after the repair was done, registration renewals, and near the back, a receipt on pale yellow paper, the kind of thermal paper that fades if you leave it in sunlight. Ridley Brothers Auto. Wake County, North Carolina. Date: 2 days before my mother died. Service: rear brake inspection and adjustment. Paid in cash. No signature on the receipt. The shop stamp at the top, the service code in the middle, the total at the bottom. $43. I took photographs of the receipt from 4 different angles. Then I photographed the entire contents of the box, tab by tab, page by page, the property deed that predated her marriage to Roy, the insurance correspondence, the bank statements from the account she had held in her name alone before it was folded into Roy's joint account. I returned the box to exactly where it had been. I replaced Brooke's jackets on top of it in the same arrangement I had found them. Then I moved through the rest of the apartment, photographing Brooke's belongings as evidence of occupancy without touching anything. I was back at the hotel by 1:15. I sent everything to Carol, and then I opened my research database and typed in the name from the receipt. Ridley Brothers Auto had been a subsidiary of a holding company called Trident Property and Services, incorporated in North Carolina, dissolved 8 years ago. Trident Property and Services appeared in the background documentation I had already compiled on Kyle Voss. It appeared twice. Once in a list of business entities connected to a financial fraud judgment against Kyle in Forsyth County, and once in a property transfer dispute from the Wilmington case. The subsidiary had been dissolved 3 years after my mother died. Kyle's network had existed before he met Brooke, before he met my father. The garage that had serviced my mother's car 2 days before her death had been operating under the same holding company that Kyle Voss had used to move money and obscure his transactions for over a decade. I called Carol. "I have the receipt," I said, "Ridley Brothers Auto, 2 days before. And I have the corporate connection to Kyle Voss. The subsidiary chain is documented." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm filing a formal request to the Wake County District Attorney today. The receipt, the insurance timeline, and the Voss connection. That's enough to ask for a review." "What about the other 2 fronts?" "The civil case is ready. The SBI referral for insurance fraud and conspiracy I can file simultaneously. I've been in contact with an agent at the FBI Financial Crimes Unit about Voss. His pattern across 3 states makes it a federal matter. They were already watching him." That stopped me, already watching him. Apparently the Wilmington case was not the end of their interest. He has a longer history than what shows up in public records. A pause. "We're going to coordinate timing. Everything happens at once. Local police for the occupancy and fraud, SBI for Roy, FBI for Voss. I need 2 more days to get the warrants aligned." 2 days, I said. "Jennifer." Her voice shifted slightly. "The camera's in your apartment. They're going to want whatever you've recorded in the last 12 days. They can have all of it. Is there anything on those recordings you need me to know about before they see it?" I thought about the recorded confession. Late night, the 2 of them in my living room, Brooke's voice unguarded. "Dad promised me if we got this done, I'd never have to worry about money again, just like after Mom." "There's something from last night," I said. "I was going to send it to you this morning." I pulled up the footage and clipped it and sent it while Carol was still on the line. She watched it. "Jennifer." "I know." That phrase, just like after Mom, combined with what's already in the file. The DA is going to want to move faster than 2 days. Then let them move. She sent it up the chain that afternoon. By evening, I had confirmation from Carol that the timing had been set. The following morning, warrants aligned, local, state, and federal moving simultaneously. Roy was expected to arrive at the condo at approximately 9 to meet with a notary for the title transfer. My only instruction had been, "I want to be watching when it happens." I was at the hotel desk at 6:45 the next morning, with the camera feed open on my laptop and a coffee I had made from the in-room machine that tasted like nothing but was hot. The feed showed Brooke and Kyle still asleep. Roy's car appeared in the parking lot camera at 7:04. He sat in the car for several minutes before coming in, which was the kind of detail I filed away without analyzing. He entered the lobby at 7:11. I watched the hallway camera, the elevator, the door to my unit. He had a key. The one I had given him 3 years ago when I bought the place, for emergencies, a gesture I had already forgotten by the time I handed it over. He used it now, stepping into my apartment with the folder of documents under his arm, setting it on my kitchen counter with the ease of a man who had been planning this for a long time and had arrived at the final step. Brooke came out in a bathrobe. Kyle emerged from the bedroom, buttoning his cuff, shaking Roy's hand across my kitchen table with the smooth confidence of a business arrangement nearly complete. The three of them sat down. My table, my chairs, my home. I watched my father lay out the documents. He explained the notary's arrival time. Brooke nodded. Kyle leaned back in his chair with his coffee. At 8:43, there was a knock at the door. Brooke crossed the living room. She reached for the handle. She opened it, expecting a notary. Carol Embry was standing in the hallway behind 2 officers from Charlotte Mecklenburg Police. Carol had dressed for this. Dark suit, the good one she wore to court, her briefcase in one hand and a folder in the other. She looked at Brooke with the expression she used for opposing counsel when she had already won. From the hotel room, I watched Brooke's face change. I watched her step back. I watched her turn toward Kyle with something that was asking him to fix this. Kyle stepped back, hands up, palms out, the practiced gesture of a man with a plan already formed for exactly this outcome. I don't know what this is about. I'm just her boyfriend. I'm not involved in any family business. 3 seconds. That was how long it took him to leave her standing there. Brooke turned toward the room, toward Roy, toward the door, toward the officers, and then she did the thing she always did under real pressure. The performative confidence collapsed all at once, and what was underneath it was panic, bright and uncontrolled. You were supposed to be in Dubai. The words came out loud. You were supposed to never know. She did not realize in that moment that she had just confirmed premeditation in front of 2 police officers and Carol Embry, who was already writing something on the folder in her hand. Roy said nothing. His attorney, who had arrived for the notarization and was standing near the kitchen with his briefcase, read the warrants, read the evidence summary Carol provided, and then quietly closed his briefcase. I can't represent you in this matter, he said to Roy. You'll need to find other counsel. He left without looking back. Roy stood at my kitchen counter. His hands were flat on the surface, the folder of documents still open in front of him. He did not look at Brooke. He did not look at the officers. He looked at the camera in the corner of my living room, the small device mounted near the ceiling, which he had never noticed and which had been recording everything for 12 days. I don't know if he understood in that moment that I was watching through it. I think he might have. 20 minutes later, the SBI agents arrived with their own warrant. Insurance fraud, conspiracy, and person of interest in the reopened investigation into the death of Grace Miller. Roy was read his rights in my living room. He was quiet through the whole of it, hands compliant, face composed in the particular way of a man who had decided the right move was stillness. And then just before they moved him toward the door, he turned toward the camera again and he said, to the room, or to me, or to whatever version of this he had told himself was true all along, everything I did was for this family. I was sitting at a hotel desk 4 blocks away with a cold cup of coffee and a laptop screen showing me my own living room. I leaned toward the microphone I had left open on the app, the one connected to the speaker in the living room camera, and though I knew he could not hear me, and though I said it only into the empty hotel room, I said it clearly. Mom was this family. You buried her twice. That afternoon, Carol called to tell me Kyle Voss had been arrested at a gas station 3 miles from my building, a go bag in the back seat, a ticket to Atlanta on his phone. The FBI agent on scene had said, according to Carol, and she relayed this with a precision I recognized as deliberate. Mr. Voss, we have been looking at you longer than she has. His pattern across 3 states was laid out in the federal complaint. Wilmington, a family in Virginia, and now the Millers. I closed the camera feed. The room was quiet. Outside, Charlotte was going about its day, ordinary and unhurried, indifferent to what had just happened 4 blocks south. I sat at the desk for a long time without opening anything else. 3 days after the arrests, I finally went home. Not to the hotel. Home, my actual home, the one I had bought with 4 years of my own savings, the one whose down payment had come from no trust account, no family money, no contribution from any person whose name was not mine. I had the title in a fireproof box in my closet, and I had looked at it twice in the days since the arrests, just to feel the specific weight of a documented fact. I took the elevator up alone. The building was quiet in the late morning way it got when everyone who had somewhere to be had already gone there. The hallway smelled like someone's laundry and old carpet, and the faint chemical sweetness of the cleaning service that came through on Thursdays. I put my key in the lock and opened the door. The smell came first. Brooks shampoo. That floral sweetness I had spent 12 days associating with surveillance footage had settled into the upholstery and the curtains in the specific way that other people's habits settle into spaces they have occupied long enough to believe belong to them. Under it, something fainter. A cologne. The ghost of a man who had stood at my refrigerator door like he was deciding between leftovers and who was currently in federal custody in a facility 3 states away from my kitchen. I stood in the doorway for a moment. Then I walked through and opened every window in the apartment, starting with the living room and working my way back. The November air came in cool and direct and smelled like nothing particular, just Charlotte in autumn. And I let it move through the rooms while I stood in the hallway and looked at what had been done to my home. Brooke had not been subtle about her occupation. There was a ring on my coffee table from a mug set down without consideration. The cushions on the couch had been rearranged in a configuration that was not mine and not comfortable. In the kitchen, someone had reorganized the cabinet where I kept my dry goods, moving things to different shelves for no reason I could identify. Small adjustments, the kind that accumulate into a feeling of wrongness you cannot immediately locate, but cannot stop noticing. I walked through each room slowly. I did not rush. I had learned years ago that the most useful thing you can do after something has been disturbed is to move through it deliberately and let the inventory happen at its own pace. The guest room was the worst of it. Brooke had unpacked fully and lived out of it fully and left it in a state that communicated complete indifference to the fact that it belonged to someone else. Clothes on the floor. A cosmetics bag open on the dresser, its contents spread across the surface. The closet door still standing open, hangers askew. In the lower left corner of the closet, the indent where my mother's box had sat was still visible in the carpet. A rectangle of compressed pile, slightly darker than the surrounding area, the exact dimensions of the box I had carried out under my arm 3 days before the arrests. I looked at that rectangle for a long time. Then I went and sat down on the floor in that spot, the way you sit down when your legs have decided the question before your mind has caught up with it. The carpet was cool. The closet smelled like cedar and Brooks shampoo and something older underneath something that might have been the box itself. The particular smell of old paper and the specific dust of a filing system that had been maintained in a house in Wake County for 30 years. I sat there until Carol called. She let me get through hello before she started, which meant she had been arranging the information in the order she wanted to deliver it. Roy was denied bail this morning. The judge cited flight risk given the asset base and the scope of the charges. Insurance fraud at that scale carries significant weight, and the conspiracy charge compounds it. He'll be held pending trial. I had expected this. Hearing it still took a moment to settle. Brooke, I said, released on bond yesterday. Passport surrendered. She's at a friend's house in Raleigh. Her attorney has been in contact with mine, which is to say she is already considering what cooperation might look like if it becomes advantageous to her. Carol paused. I would not expect a call from your sister any time soon, but I would not be surprised if at some point there is one. And Kyle, federal custody, no bail. The multi-state pattern is working against him in every possible way. The FBI had documentation on 2 prior operations before yours, and the Wilmington case was just the most recent. His attorney filed for bail and was denied the same afternoon. I was quiet for a moment. Through the open windows, I could hear the city. Traffic. Someone somewhere below playing music. The sound of Charlotte going about its day, entirely indifferent to the fact that Roy Miller had been denied bail, or that a man named Kyle Voss was in federal custody, or that a woman was sitting on the floor of her guest room closet on a weekday morning. The autopsy report, I said. Yes. Carol's voice shifted into the precision she used when she was covering territory she had prepared for carefully. I requested it under NC Public Records Law. No open case required. The report shows that the fire damage to Grace's body was post-mortem and localized, which is inconsistent with the vehicle fire as the cause or immediate context of death. The original medical examiner noted this inconsistency in supplementary notes. A pause. Those notes were filed separately from the official accident report. They were never forwarded to the state investigative office before the county sheriff closed the case. No one at the state level ever saw them. I sat with the word post-mortem for a moment, not as a legal term, as a plain fact. It meant the fire had not killed her. It meant the fire had started after. The car had gone off the road into a ravine, and at some point after that it had caught fire, and the fire had not been the cause of her death. Which meant something else had, which meant the road and the ravine had not been an accident, the way Roy had said. Accident, the way he had said it once, gently, in the flat light of my kitchen, and then never offered anything more. I thought about the closed casket, the explanation he had given me that I had accepted in 30 seconds because I was standing in a kitchen in pajamas at 2 a.m, and I could not yet hold the shape of what his call meant. He had said, fire damage. He had said it as though it were a kindness, a reason to be spared something. And I had let him, because what else do you do when someone calls you at 2 a.m. and the glass of water is still sitting on the counter and the kitchen light is making everything look flat, the carpet under my hands, the indent where the box had been. So for 4 years, I said, for 4 years the flag existed in a file that no one with authority to act on it had ever opened. She let that sit for a moment. The Wake County DA has formally reopened the investigation. They will want to speak with you, and I will be present for every conversation. Nothing happens without me in the room. What does reopened mean in terms of timeline? It means they are actively building a case. Roy is already under arrest on the fraud and conspiracy charges, which gives them leverage they would not otherwise have. The DA's office is motivated. I would not give you a timeline because I don't have one yet. But I can tell you the machinery is moving. I thanked her, and she told me she would call when she had more, and she said my name before she hung up in the way she had started saying it recently with a particular weight to it, like she was making sure I was still there. After she hung up, I stayed on the floor a little longer. There was one more thing I needed to do before I could let the rest of the day happen. I found the trash bag in the corner of my bedroom, tied at the top. The things Brooke had apparently deemed disposable in a single afternoon of going through my closet. I unknotted it at the top and looked in. Clothes I had not worn in years. A scarf I did not remember. 2 boxes of things from a move I had never fully unpacked. And at the bottom, the photograph. The frame had taken the impact on one corner, and the glass had cracked across diagonally. A clean break from corner to corner. 2 triangles held in place by the backing. I lifted it out carefully and held it flat so the pieces would not separate. The photograph itself was intact. Grace was smiling in it. That slightly surprised smile, the one that arrived just before she was ready, the one that meant she had been caught by something good before she could compose herself around it. I was 10 years old in the photograph, leaning into her, squinting at whoever was holding the camera. Her hand was on my shoulder. She was wearing the yellow dress she had worn every summer for years, the one she claimed was too comfortable to retire. The Wake County property was visible in the background, the edge of the tree line and the particular quality of light that came through those trees on summer afternoons. I carried the photograph to the kitchen counter. Roy had laid his documents out on this counter 3 days ago, the forged records and the transfer paperwork and whatever legal framework he had spent months constructing to take this apartment from me. Carol had stood on the other side of it with a court order. 2 officers had stood in my living room, and Roy had stood right here, hands flat on the surface, looking at a camera he had never noticed, and said everything I did was for this family. I set the photograph down on the counter in the spot where his documents had been. Grace smiling in her yellow dress with her hand on my shoulder. Two triangles of cracked glass holding the image exactly where it had always been. I looked at it for a moment. Then I went to the cabinet under the sink where I kept my tools, and I found the small box of picture-hanging hardware, and I spent 20 minutes taking the frame apart, carefully removing the broken glass, cutting a piece of the clear protective sheet I used for documents to replace it, and reassembling everything. It was not a perfect repair. If you held it at a certain angle in the light, you could see where the original glass had been. But the photograph was flat and clean and protected, and Grace was still smiling in her yellow dress. I hung it back in the closet on the shelf above the hanging rod, where it had been for 4 years, and I stepped back and looked at it. Then I went and sat in my living room, with the windows still open and the November air moving through and the sound of Charlotte below, and I let the quiet happen. I was not all right, in the way that means everything is fine. I understood that. What had been done to my family, what my father had done to my mother and had been in the process of doing to me, was not something that resolved into fine. There was going to be a trial, probably more than one, and there was going to be testimony and documentation and the specific long machinery of legal consequence that Carol had set in motion and that I was going to have to live inside of for however long it took. And there was the land. Carol had mentioned it at the end of the call, almost in passing, the way she sometimes mentioned things she wanted me to sit with before we addressed them directly. Because Wake County land had been sold under potentially fraudulent circumstances, she had said Roy, using authority over Grace's estate that he had obtained through her death and through a death that was now under active investigation. There may be grounds to challenge the sale, to recover the land or its assessed value. I had asked her one question. Was it her land before him? Carol had said. It was her family's land for 80 years before she married him. And I had said, then yes, 80 years. 3 generations of people who had held onto that property through the decades when selling would have been easier, who had kept it and worked it and known the name of every plant growing on its 40 acres. My mother had grown up running those fields. She had known the soil type in every corner without looking it up. She had come home to it every summer of her childhood, and she had carried it with her when she left, and she had never stopped being the woman who came from that land, even after Roy had restructured everything around her into something she no longer controlled. He had sold it 8 months after she died, undervalued, to a developer in his network. Maybe we could get it back. Maybe we couldn't. Carol would tell me when she knew more. But I sat in my living room in the late morning quiet, and I thought about my mother keeping that filing cabinet for 30 years, labeling every folder in her particular leftward, leaning cursive, keeping every receipt and every document and every record she had ever received, because she had grown up understanding that what you owned needed to be documented in your own hand, or it could become someone else's with enough time and enough lawyers. She had been right. She had just not known which lawyer to be afraid of. My phone buzzed on the cushion beside me. A number I recognized. Brooke's cell, the one that had been in my contacts since she got her first phone at 15. I looked at it ring. I let it go to voicemail. Then I picked up the phone and played the message. Her voice was different than it had been on the camera feed. The performative confidence was entirely gone. What was underneath it was not particularly dramatic. It was just small. The voice of someone who had arrived somewhere they had not planned to arrive, and did not know what to do once they got there. Jennifer, please? I didn't know what Dad was doing. I didn't know about Mom. Please call me back. I'm your sister. I listened to it once. Then I set the phone face down on the cushion and picked up the photograph of Grace that I had taken down from the closet shelf and set on the side table while I was rearranging things. And I held it in my lap with both hands. The camera system was still running. The feeds were still live, all 4 of them, the habit of 12 days not yet broken. I reached over and closed the app and set the phone down again. Outside, Charlotte kept going. A car passed. Someone, somewhere, laughed at something. The ordinary sounds of a city that had not noticed and would not notice, because the ordinary machinery of other people's lives does not pause for the private reckonings of any single person sitting in her own living room on a Thursday morning in November. The condo was quiet. It was mine. It had always been mine. But the thing I had gotten back, the thing that sat heavier than the title in the fireproof box, and quieter than the camera feeds, and more permanent than any legal proceeding that was still months or years from conclusion, was the truth about a woman who had held her hand on my shoulder in a yellow dress on a summer afternoon and smiled like she had been caught by something good. It was not fine. It had not been fine for 4 years and probably longer. But now, at least, it was known, and known was somewhere to start.